If you could find a way to be famous or make a name for yourself, what would it be for? The typical go-to for this is, the sports or actors or music, politicians, whatever. However, nowadays, you can make a name for yourself for various reasons other than skill, talent, or politics, or music, or whatever you want to put out there. For example, if you would like to have lots of children, you can become very famous. You can even have your own TV show, if that's something that you would like to do and get famous for. And if it's not that, perhaps you would like to have multiple wives. You too could also have your own TV show and make a name for yourself if this is something that you would like to do. And due to our technology, alongside the social media, you can get famous for a picture that goes viral and then gets tons of captions put on it. We like to call those memes. And over the years, these pictures, literally these people, all they do is they get their picture taken, and now all of a sudden they're famous because they took a picture. Well, if it's not a picture, then perhaps maybe you might say some of the wildest, the craziest, and often perhaps dumbest things that would then make you extremely famous. For example, some of you may remember this girl right here. She was on the Dr. Phil episode, and she was pretty wild in her years, and somebody said something smart to her. She said, "Cash me outside, how about that?" In other words, she said, "Catch me outside, how about that?" And for whatever reason, she went viral because of how she said that. And then there was also this guy right here, because there was a apparent robber that tried to get into their house, and the news reporter came up to him and he said the phrase, "Hide your kids, hide your wife, and hide your husbands." And everybody just thought that was the funniest thing. And he became known as the YouTube guy if people saw him. Then later on, they made a song about him saying this. It was like a spoof based on what he said. Well, if it's not something that you say, then perhaps it could be maybe something that you do that makes you go viral. Back in the 90s, there was a lady, she spilled coffee on herself from McDonald's. She sued them and then won a lot of money because she spilled the coffee. Now, what had happened was she was sitting in the passenger seat of the car trying to put sugar and cream in her coffee. Her grandson drives off. The coffee starts spilling all over her pants. Well, what had happened was the coffee at McDonald's was apparently being served hotter than normal places, and it went right through her pants, and she actually had to go to the hospital to get skin grafts put in. So she had sued McDonald's so that they would at least just cover the medical expenses. And McDonald's said no. Then it turned into a big ordeal, and she actually ended up winning some $1 million or something like that. All because she spilled coffee on herself. This became such a cultural joke that even Seinfeld made an episode based on this situation right here. Or maybe perhaps what you could do is you could play quarterback for a team, run into the rear of the guy blocking for you, and fumble the football, and that would really make you famous for a lot of reasons. As a matter of fact, last year, this happened over 10 years ago on the left. Last year, there was a punter that punted the football into the rear of the guy blocking for him, and the guy that's laying on the ground, Sanchez number 6, tweeted out, "Hey, that's my lane." He was actually protecting what it was that he became famous for. Or you could be playing quarterback and you can be running out of bounds, still trying to make a play, thinking everything's still fine, but it's really not. Look at number 69 celebrating, and he still thinks the play's going on. So if it's not something you say, if it's not something you do, then I also remember that there was this show, and I don't even know if it's still on anymore, but this show right here, America's Got Talent. I used to watch this a lot. Now, the whole premise of this show is you got people who would come before the judges and they would execute some sort of talent. Some of these talents were talents that you would imagine, but some were just really off-the-wall talents. It's kind of like, how did you even think to do this? But anyway, they had to stand in front of the judges so they could move forward, and then if they kept moving on, they would win the show and they would make a name for themselves. People that nobody knew, all of a sudden, they would get famous for this, and they would propel themselves further in life. The first thing a contestant do, though, is they would go to the audition, and they will show the auditions as the new season comes out. And I remember watching some of these auditions, and I cannot tell you how many times that people would be auditioning and their performance or their talent or whatever it is they would come before the judges would be so bad that I would sit there and I could find myself cringing and like sweating because of how awkward it made me. And maybe you've even been in situations like that where you're watching a TV show and something happens in the scene, you're kind of like, oh, make it stop. Well, that's what I would do when I would watch America's Got Talent, and then I would sit there and wonder to myself, why in the world or how in the world did they think this was going to be a good idea to come in front of these judges, in front of all these people, and do this? Like, what kind of conversations were you having with yourself before you decided to go and do this? And how were you not able to see or recognize that this wasn't going to go very well for you? But needless to say, that's what these people do on America's Got Talent. And there was a group of people in the Bible who had this bright idea that they were going to make a name for themselves. And they were really sure of themselves that they were going to do that. And so when you get to Genesis chapter 9, not very far from the beginning of the Bible, the waters have receded from the flood. Noah's going to step out of the ark. And here's what it says in Genesis chapter 9, verse 1. So God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. So imagine you've been in the ark for quite some time, and you step out, and first off, you get out and you look around and you think, well, this looks totally different than the last time I saw this. But then it would also come to the point where you'd be wondering, okay, so what do I do next? Now that all this has happened, what's next for me and my family? Well, God tells him, very plain and simple, be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. That's it. That's all he's told to say. That's all he's told to do. So this seems pretty simple enough, and hey, maybe along the way, try not doing evil again, considering we just got done flooding the world because of that. So you move on 2 chapters later, and you get to Genesis chapter 11, which is where the scripture reading came from. And here's what it says in the first 4 verses of Genesis chapter 11. Now the whole earth had one language and one speech, and it came to pass as they journeyed from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. Then they said to one another, come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly. They had brick for stone, and they had asphalt for mortar, and they said, come, let us build ourselves a city, and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad the face of the whole earth. Now, does anybody see a problem here, especially with what God just said to do 2 chapters ago? Let's go back. It says, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. So what's the problem? Well, based on what they just said, they're doing the exact opposite of filling the earth. We're in the 2nd chapter from this command, about 100 years after the flood, and look at what has already happened with the people. What is it about people that just want to be so stubborn when it comes to what God says? Over and over and over again, there's this just stubbornness that just comes in. Think about it. How many times in your life have you literally done the exact opposite of what God has said to do or not to do? Seems to happen all the time. Why do we either intentionally or unintentionally think that our ideas or our way of thinking sometimes sounds or appears better than God's? And what's even crazier about that is right now, if God were to walk in this room and get in front of everybody and say, hey, here's what I want you to go do, you know what we would do? We'd be like, yes, sir, we're on it. Got it. And yet, for whatever reason, whenever you get away from that situation for a little while, all of a sudden, this same intentionality and same way of listening to God, all of a sudden it starts to waver and it changes, and that same energy and that desire and that drive, it tends to change a little bit. Even in this example, God said to be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. Well, they were being fruitful, they were multiplying, and they come to a place and they think, you know, we should just stay here. This was their own way of thinking. This is how they thought the plan should go. So here's the tricky part to all this. At first, it seems that if you look at this at a quick glance, you're just reading the story and you get to this part, you think, I don't really see what the big deal is with them wanting to stay here. I mean, wouldn't you be satisfied if you had a good group of people that you enjoy being with and you guys just wanted to stay in one place? That sounds reasonable, right? So at a quick glance, you look at it and you think, I just don't see what the big deal is. But see, it's the thoughts and questions like this where we get fooled over and over again. So, why does it matter in this situation? Well, let's just go 2 more chapters again to Genesis chapter 13. And Abraham and Lot had come to a piece of land. And here's what it said. Now the land was not able to support them, that they might dwell together, for their possessions were so great that they could not dwell together. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. The Canaanites and the Perizzites then dwelt in this land. The land could not support them. They ran out of room and they started fighting with each other. Now, think about the scenario here where maybe you do have a crowded area and people start to get a little less patient, don't they? Or maybe you just got people who have been around each other way too much, and it just seemed like all of a sudden if they just breathe the wrong way, they start fighting with each other, and you're thinking, okay, you two need to go separate. I tell you what, go on a mission trip with Daniel and Landon, and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about, because they fought the whole week we were there. Now, God is going to come up with a solution, okay, to this whole problem here. Here's what the solution is. He says, Abraham said to Lot, please let there be no strife between you and me and between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brethren. Is not the whole land before you? Please separate from me. If you take the left, then I will go to the right, or if you go to the right, then I will go to the left. So the solution was they were going to go their separate ways and fill other land that was available. Who would have thought that that would be such a really good idea in order to promote better peace and less strife? So now that we look at God's command from Genesis 9, we can see part of the problem here and what's going to happen with them choosing to disobey. It's going to cause a whole lot of problems for them in the future. So again, to answer the question on why it matters, God in His wisdom knew this and was trying to give instructions to guide them. And that's the thing. God is never going to give a command, a guideline, instruction, wisdom, without some sort of purpose or reason behind it. In all cases, it will always be wiser than you, and it will always be for your own good. No matter what you think about it, how you think about it, or how you feel about it, because your feelings will lie to you. And you can't outsmart it, and you can't outdo it. But yet, in another sense, it seems like there's an even deeper problem that's really going on here too. Let's go back to the first 4 verses and look at verses 3 and 4. Pay attention to how many times they say the phrase, let us. Then they said to one another, come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly. They had a brick for stone and they had asphalt for mortar. And they said, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. And just 2 verses right there, I counted 3 times they started saying, let us, let us, let us. It seems that their whole way of thinking, their process here, and their decisions were only about themselves. Especially the part where it says they wanted to make a name for themselves. What kind of name were they looking for? What is it they really wanted? And what could be better for them in this situation than simply just doing what God has told them to do? As a matter of fact, where was God in their decisions in this? It appears that we've got quite a bit of pride going on in this story. That's the same old theme when it comes to the stories in Scripture, isn't it? Self-thinking, self-serving, self-glorification, selfishness altogether. And the one thing they do mention that has to do anything with God's command in verse 4 is it literally says, this is what we don't want to happen. They said, lest we be scattered abroad the whole face of the earth. That was the one thing, one of the 2 things God told Noah what to do was to go and spread out over the earth. So the one thing they do mention that God said, their intention was to do the exact opposite of it. Why in the world did they think this was such a good idea? How are they not able to see or recognize that this just wasn't going to go well? I could ask myself the same questions in many, many decisions I too have made. When filled up with pride, the focus becomes so much on you that there's less room for God. You think and start to live more independently from God, which then leads to disobedience in God. If these people do this in disobedience to God and they appear successful in their own eyes, according to their pride, then what else will they continue to do from here? What compels someone to consider him or think about him if you appear successful and life is good without God in the picture? What reason or motivation do you have to consider him if you feel like you're accomplishing this life right now and yet you feel like he has nothing to do with it? You worked hard, you earned it, you did this, you did that. And it's very easy to fall guilty of that. When the whole realization is you're only doing the things you're doing because you've got a God who loves you enough to bless you to do it in the first place. So they took their greatest strength of being unified as a group of people and they used it for the wrong reasons. And so God has no choice but to intervene because God always has to do what's best. So if you think through the rest of the story, and we'll read it, what does God decide to intervene and do? Here's what it says. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. And the Lord said, indeed, the people are one and they all have one language. And this is what they begin to do. Now nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them. Come, let us go down and there and confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they ceased building the city. Therefore its name is called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth. And from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth. If the people won't scatter, God's going to cause them to scatter. To ensure he is successful at this, he decides to confuse the languages, because it's really hard to live with people when you can't understand what each other's saying. So it only makes sense that if he confuses the languages, then the people who can actually understand what each other's saying, they go their separate ways, and then guess what? They start filling the land again like they were originally supposed to. So if you've ever wondered where all of our languages in the world come from, right here is the very reason why it happened. These were the base languages that were created, and it just evolved over time. I did find this is pretty interesting. People who study languages can take the thousands of languages spoken today, and they can trace them all back to a handful of original language groups, which fits perfectly with what we're reading tonight. So despite this grand and wise decision these people had to make a name for themselves, did you happen to notice that God still had to come down to them? All that prideful effort just to end up in vain. Always has been that way and always will be that way. But did you happen to notice how God stopped the sinning from getting worse? He broke up the people from each other, which means they couldn't talk or associate with the same exact people anymore. Perhaps one of the biggest factors in moving away from sin is to stop associating with the same people where the sin continues to happen and always grows worse. Did you catch what I just said? Who do you choose as your friends? Who are you spending most of your time with? If the people you are choosing as your friends, the people you are choosing to spend time with, the people you're choosing to hang out with, if they're not speaking and doing godly things, it's time to disperse and go your separate ways. The irony in this story, the whole story, is that God actually wants his people to be unified together, but he wants it to be his way. Have you ever noticed the reversal to the whole story that happens in the New Testament by any chance? In Acts chapter 2, the Spirit comes down on the apostles, and they were able to speak different languages, thus unifying the languages in this moment. And in this moment, all the different languages and all the different nations who were dispersed were together in one place as opposed to being apart. And because of the unified language with the unified lesson, with the people being unified in one location, they heard the gospel in their own language in hopes of bringing unity to make a great name. But this time, the name is not for themselves, but for one name and one name only, and that is Jesus the Christ. And again, in order for this to happen, it wasn't about man building up to God to reach to God, but God came down in the form of man in all humility to make it happen. Instead of building this independent building or a temple that is supposed to be constructed like they did, God is building a collective temple with the people that He is saving. And now, nothing is impossible for those who were in Christ. What was destructively true in the Tower of Babel became constructively true through the gospel of Jesus Christ. So when it comes to a name that you want to make, which name is it? Is it yours or is it His? No matter what you tell yourself and what you try to do, it will never be better than His. And this story tonight is a huge proof of that. And if that's the case, why wouldn't you just take all the effort that you want to put into something and do it according to God's way instead of your way, according to God's thinking, instead of your thinking, according to God's decisions, instead of your decisions? The choice is always up to us, but either way, it's got to be according to God's way. So tonight, when it comes to making a name for yourself, if you're not a Christian, but you would love to be a part of that, to make a name for Jesus, there's no better opportunity than to do that tonight, to put Him on in baptism. Or if you're here tonight and you are a Christian, but you just need some prayers, some support, some edification, we can do that too. If there's anything we can do to help anyone tonight, please come while together we stand and sing.